and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video I would like to talk about GFRIEND's Apple, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of the lyrics, the music video, and on how the song is connected to GFRIEND's storyline and the big hit Multiverse. Now, Apple is a song that deals with the themes of temptation and the process of embracing this temptation without turning back. According to what the girls said during the press conference, the concept for this comeback follows the story of a girl who is able to find confidence in her desires after being initially overwhelmed by temptation. And right off the bat, this is very interesting because what this statement implies is that in the song, temptation is used as a medium of transformation. Now, in the video, this journey through temptation is portrayed by mixing different types of symbols and imagery, because if on the one hand the main focus of this comeback is on the sirens and the apple, on the other the MV also has a lot of references to many other sources. There's quite a lot to unpack here, but in order to get a clear picture of what's going on, the first thing that we need to do is to pay attention to the trailer and the setting of the trailer, because those alone are an essential aspect of the story as a whole. You see, according to what we saw in Tale of the Glass Bead Butterfly Effect, the journey that leads the girls to the apple tree begins when the path divides in two and they run towards the blue light. Now, the fact that this journey takes place inside of a forest is immediately very telling, because the archetype of the forest dark is a very common symbol that represents the darker aspects of our unconscious. This is a symbol that is also used by Tomorrow Bad Together in parts of the story that are meant to convey a sense of mystery, dread, and danger, but in the context of GFRIEND's Apple, the closest analogy that we can get can actually be found in BTS. You see, if on the one hand in Map of the Soul, the forest is the location where we can find BTS's shadow, which, much like the sirens, can be seen as the more monstrous side of a person that is repressed in our unconscious. On the other, in Blood, Sweat and Tears and Butterfly, the boys use the archetype of the forest dark as a metaphor for them giving in to temptation. As we'll see in a second, this is only one of the many parallels that Apple has with Blood, Sweat and Tears, but the connection with Butterfly here is an interesting one. Not only because of the recurring presence of the butterfly itself, but also because in that song, BTS say that they shouldn't go into the forest because this is their Kafka on the Shore. Now, Kafka on the Shore is a novel by Murakami Haruki that heavily influenced BTS's storyline since the very beginning. And I feel the need to mention this because GFRIEND's storyline seems to be drawing inspiration from it as well. Much like what we saw in Crossroads, Apple, and Butterfly Effect, Kafka on the Shore not only has time travel and portrays the forest as a labyrinth where the protagonist gets lost into, but also features the butterfly as a symbol of transformation that initially tempts Kafka to follow it into the forest. What's interesting here is that in the novel, the characters themselves describe their story as a metaphor. And in this metaphor, the labyrinth in the forest is defined as a principle that exists inside of an individual, meaning that the journey that Kafka goes through in the forest is an inner journey that reflects the adventure that takes place in reality. Now, if we apply the same logic to Apple, this means that the events that take place in the video portray an inner journey that could be considered as a metaphor for what happens in reality. And this makes sense because the entire plot of the video revolves around them being lured in by the song of the sirens and biting the apple that will lead these sirens to take over them. This is basically a metaphorical journey that shows the girls falling into temptation and awakening a part of themselves that until now was repressed. But the problem here is that at the end of the video, we also see that the butterflies the girls followed at the beginning of this journey were freed by the very part of themselves that is awakened at the end. So, what is happening here? Are the butterflies leading them in the wrong direction? And how do we fit Apple into the timeline? Well, let's take a look. Now, in the mini-book that can be found in the Labyrinth album, the story says that GFRIEND come from a village where all girls are born with a clear glass bead. When they grow up, the girls receive a magic power from a lake, and even if all of them are happy with their abilities, they also start to get envious about the others' powers. Now, this is basically the story that we were told in the first Tale of the Glass Bead video, right? But one of the illustrations that can be found in the book is actually very telling, because as Una walks in the darkness followed by a butterfly, her shadow turns into a monster as it holds the glass bead in its hands. Now flash forward to Song of the Sirens, where the second story foreshadows that the envy that caused them to fight might actually have had tragic consequences as well, which incidentally is the same thing that we saw back in Fingertip. In this story, Una wants to find a way to fix the situation, and while she is overpowered by sadness, a mysterious voice tells her to look for the blue butterfly to become more powerful. This suggestion leads Una to a bookshop in the middle of the forest, and here the owner actually provides new information about the village. In the story, the man says that once upon a time, the village the girls come from was called the village of the blue butterfly, and the power that these blue butterflies provided gave people a very happy life. When some of the citizens started to use the butterflies for evil, however, the butterflies themselves disappeared. But in the story, the man also says that the butterflies are not gone for good, because they are waiting for special people that can handle the power that they are able to provide. Now, at this point, the man looks at Una's glass bead and decides that she could actually be one of the people that the butterflies were waiting for. So he gives her a box with 5 butterflies that give her the ability to go back in time and save her friends. This is the same box that we saw back in Crossroads, so now we know where those butterflies actually came from. But as we see in the video, this power comes with a price, because each time Una uses a butterfly, her glass bead becomes darker and darker. According to the bookshop owner, if Una ends up using all the butterflies before succeeding in her quest, something terrible will happen that she will not be able to control. But Una decides to take the butterflies anyway, because the safety of her friends is more important than her own. The story ends with Una leaving the shop as another girl arrives, so even if we still don't know who that girl is, this scene implies that Una might not be the only one who is trying to fix the situation. Now, if we take all this information into account and try to fit Apple into the narrative, I think that even if what we saw in the video could fit the unspeakable consequences that Una was warned about by the owner of the bookshop, Apple is actually portraying the events that we saw at the end of the very first book. That is, the girls falling into temptation and being taken over by the envy that they feel for one another. Much like what we see in Apple and Butterfly Effect, the illustration shows the shadow holding the glass bead and a young Una walking in the darkness. But the real giveaway here is the butterfly, because according to the story, at this point the butterflies are still nowhere to be found. So why there is a butterfly there? Well, here's the thing. Even if the butterfly is a universal symbol of transformation, in GFRIEND's storyline it's also a symbol of magical power. The butterflies give power to the villagers and later on give more power to Una to travel back in time. But since the bookshop owner said that she is one of the special ones, this implies that the power of the butterfly was inside of her all along, that is, even before the man gives Una the butterfly box. This means that the butterflies that we see in Crossroads are different from the butterflies that we see in Apple and Butterfly Effect, because if the first one are real physical objects, the second ones are a metaphor for the power that Una is looking for. If you go back and watch the trailer again, even if the video shows Una running after the butterflies, the narration not only doesn't mention them, but also says that the girls run towards the blue light. This means that at the very beginning, the inciting incident is that the girls ran after power, and it's that power that caused their downfall. You see, the whole point of the butterfly effect is that a small event can cause huge repercussions, so them being jealous of each other caused them to fall into temptation and seek more power even if they shouldn't have. This implies that this desire did come from a part of themselves that was hidden inside of them. But when they eventually embrace this temptation and actually act on it, this part of themselves reveals itself in the form of the sirens. The reason why the video shows that the siren frees the butterflies after Una bites the apple is because what we are seeing is a time loop. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. And this idea would also explain why so far Una seems unable to fix the problems that the girls have in reality. Even if in the story she has the best of intentions and wants to use the power to help the others, the very idea of finding the butterflies comes from a whisper that she hears in the forest. So it's still the siren that is leading the game, only that Una doesn't realize it yet. What Una has to do here is to learn to use the power that she has the right way, but the siren in her is working against her, so she keeps failing and the glass bead keeps getting darker in real life as well. Now at this point we still don't know what would happen if Una failed in her quest, but the fact that the glass bead is turning black could imply that if she doesn't succeed, the siren will take over for good. And this would also explain why the siren led her to the shop in the first place. The monster that Envy has awakened is trying to get out, and the only way to stop this from happening is for Una to realize that the real enemy to face is inside of herself. Now, the idea of the protagonist of a story who has to confront their dark side in order to get to the resolution is actually very important, because as it turns out, this is the same inner journey that takes place in both BTS and Tomorrow by Together storylines. You see, if we take a look at the imagery GFRIEND share with BTS and TXT, one of the aspects that connects these three groups in the multiverse is that even if they are at different stages of their adventure, all three of them seem to be going through a metaphorical journey that follows the same structure of the archetype of the hero's journey. Now, this archetype is very complex to explain, so I'm not going in detail about this, but on a general level, the hero's journey includes three main stages. The first involves the hero leaving to accomplish their quest. The second involves the hero's descent into the underworld, while the third involves the hero's return to the world and their final transformation as a new individual. This means that the hero's journey can be seen as a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that could also symbolize a person facing their inner shadows, accepting them, and rising once again as an enlightened individual. But if BTS has accomplished this metaphorical journey and supposedly reached their goal in On and Stay Gold, when it comes to the actual storylines set in their respective universes, all three groups still have a long way to go, because the shadowy part of themselves still rule the lives of the characters. This is because in all their cases they lack self-awareness, or at the very least they have very little understanding of what's going on. If GFRIEND are lost in the labyrinth, Jin has to find the map of the soul in order to navigate in his universe, and Tomorrow by Together are stuck in a maze in the mirror that Soobin turned real. But the problem here is that none of this mess will be solved until they realize that the problems they face in reality are consequences of the issues that they have to overcome inside of themselves. As Kafka on the Shore says, the principle of the labyrinth is inside of the individual, but the labyrinth we have on the inside is linked to the labyrinth of life that exists on the outside. They are one, the reflection of the other, so as metaphorical as they can be, the events that we see in Apple do have repercussions in the story set in reality as well. In videos like Time for the Moon Knight, Fingertip, and Crossroads, we already got several clues about how envy affects their life going forward. But Apple portrays the literal downfall that leads to these events, so let's dive right in and see what's going on. At the beginning, the video opens with Una picking the apple from the tree and taking a bite. Now, the idea of them biting the apple as a symbol of them falling into temptation has very biblical connotations here, because it heavily recalls the imagery of Eve being tempted by the snake and biting the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The whole concept of them being taken over by their inner monster, however, is expressed in several different ways, because even if the focus is on the figure of the siren, the way these sirens are portrayed changes from scene to scene. Sometimes we see them as witches, sometimes we see them as fairy-like maidens, and sometimes even as ghostly shadows that lurk in the deepest parts of our unconscious. And even if at first glance these representations may seem a bit random, in reality they are far from it, because throughout history, sirens have been portrayed in all these different ways as well. You see, even if in modern days the siren is often seen as a creature that is closely associated to the mermaid, historically the representation has changed from normal maidens to women with wings to women with fishtails to nymphs living in the woods. But no matter which story we are talking about here, the only element that always remained constant is that sirens use their beautiful voices to attract their victims and lead them to their deaths. Now, this ability obviously makes the siren a great symbol of sensuality and temptation. And even if Apple heavily focuses on these aspects, the alluring nature of the song should not distract you from the fact that the Song of the Siren is first and foremost a song of death. You see, the Song of the Siren is a song that leads the victim from one realm to the next. And in this context, this is very important because it connects us right back to the hero's journey to the underworld, which implies a metaphorical first death which leads the individual to a new rebirth. If we compare GFRIEND sirens to BTS's Black Swans, for instance, the role of these creatures are exactly the same, because the siren song and the swan song are both songs that foreshadow a rite of passage involving death. These songs imply a literal journey of the soul, and back in ancient Greece, the connection between the sirens and death was also conveyed by actually placing these sirens at a crossroads, which I don't know about you, but to me sure seems very fitting with the overall concept GFRIEND is going for here. In the Odyssey, for instance, Circe tells Odysseus that he will find the sirens when the road divides in two. And in the myth of which is a story by Plato about a man who goes on a journey in the afterlife and comes back to tell the tale, the sirens can be found at a crossroads between heaven and hell. You see, the bottom line here is that in Greek mythology, sirens basically play the role of mediators between different worlds. So according to which type of siren you follow, this siren will lead you to the path that is actually meant for you. In GFRIEND's case, for instance, the Song of the Sirens leads them to a metaphorical death that frees the very sirens that they're following. And throughout the video, this idea is conveyed by Una losing consciousness after biting the apple, by Yerin waking up again and following the butterfly in the wrong direction, and by the final shot of the Black Witches arising and sitting on their thrones. What the song is portraying here is a journey that leads the girls to the death of their innocence and to their dark side taking over them. And even if the lyrics imply an initial sense of doubt about the road they're taking, the girls eventually embrace this change because the storyline GFRIEND are telling us is also a coming-of-age story that is meant to show their journey from youth to womanhood. Them allowing their innocence to die and the fear and excitement that are associated with this process are part of a transformation that is as overwhelming as it is natural. And even if the lyrics heavily focus on the sensual nature of this awakening, when it comes to the storyline, the song also provides more specific clues about the roles that the girls are playing. If you look closely, at the beginning the sirens are portrayed as white witches, which could be a reference to the ambiguous nature of the monster, but also a possible callback to the beginning of the story where the girls acquired their powers from the lake. Like the bookshop owner foreshadows in the mini-book, this scene implies that the magic the girls have inside of them is not inherently evil, but has the potential to become it when they fall into temptation and allow their envy to take over them. This idea is perfectly conveyed in the scene of the dining room, which represents the part of the story where they literally get intoxicated by envy. The imagery of the girls drinking, eating flowers, and smoking butterflies here is meant to convey a sense of confusion and intoxication. And much like what we see in Yuju's scene, when the envy they feel for one another blinds them, they end up alone because the power of the butterflies has taken over their innocence completely. As the video shows us, this is the moment in time where Yerin gets lost in the story. And if Fingertip and Crossroads already foreshadowed this idea, the downfall that the girls experience in that scene is also reinforced by several callbacks to Blood, Sweat and Tears and the Wings era. In both instances, we see one of the members biting the apple, we see them drinking and getting intoxicated, we see references to the swing, which imply that this is a moment where they're still going back and forth between childhood and adulthood, and most importantly, we see that temptation is sealed with a kiss, which implies the death of innocence and the awakening of the dark side of themselves. Apple and Blood, Sweat and Tears here show the group's first experience with temptation in the very same way and using the very same symbols. But in contrast to BST, Apple also shows us that the Black Witches are not set free by temptation itself, but by the girls acting on this temptation and eventually bewitching one another through magic. Now, if we apply this scene to the storyline, this means that at some point, envy led the girls to actually hurt each other using their powers. And if Fingertip already foreshadowed this event by showing Shinbi killing Yerin by mistake, Apple reinforces this idea by showing the source of temptation literally bursting into flames after the girls use magic on each other. At this point, things start to get interesting because not only Shinbi is revealed to be the Red Witch, but we also see that she's the one who gives Una the red bead, meaning that she is the siren that triggered Una's transformation and the death of her innocence. Now, in contrast to Una, who bites the apple, Shinbi actually doesn't. She just plays with it, which could imply that in the context of the storyline, the main source of conflict may be that Una becomes envious of Shinbi's power and literally bites into this envy by allowing her shadow to take control. This idea is once again confirmed by both Fingertip and Crossroads, where we see the two of them fighting and Yerin's death being caused by their conflict. But the fact that Shinbi is the Red Witch here could also imply that in comparison to the others, her power might have been stronger and darker to begin with. If we take a look at the mini-books, one of the girls is actually portrayed with a bigger shadow than the others. And in the second story, she's also the same girl that shows up at the bookshop right after Una leaves. Now, if we assume that this girl is actually Shinbi, this could mean that in the story, Shinbi's siren version could be the one who triggered all the events in the first place. And even if for now this is just a guess, the fact that she's the one who dances the dance of fire when the witching hour descends implies that this could actually be the case. You see, the dance of fire here is a very important clue, because if we go back and take a look at the multiverse, both BTS and Tomorrow by Together have a similar dance that symbolizes the freeing of their inner monster or shadow. In Eternally, for instance, TXT say that the night the rain blazed the light, this rain of fire is overlapped with a dance that is able to free nightmares. BTS instead not only mention a last dance in blood, sweat and tears, but they also use this image as a metaphor for their first death in Black Swan. The dance that really seals the deal, however, is the dance of fire that we see in On, which they perform to symbolize their descent into the underworld and the end of their inner world that anticipates their rebirth. In all these cases, this connection is also reinforced by the use of the thorns and the horns, both of which could be seen as a callback to the crown of thorns of Jesus Christ, which Jung uses as a symbol for the death of the innocent and for the struggle and hardship this innocent has to endure in order to be born again. If in BTS the crown of thorns is center stage during their dance of fire, in GFRIEND we see the thorns filling up the castle, Yuju with a crown of thorns, and a winged figure with a crown of thorns during the live stages. The reason why I'm also including the horns in this context is because in Tomorrow by Together the horns actually turn into a crown. But in Eternally, the crown Yeonjun is wearing is filled with thorns to symbolize once again the death of the innocent. In all these cases, the dance of fire, the thorns, and the horns portray the very same process, that is, them going through the inferno of their passions and being taken over by them in a moment of weakness. As On shows us, however, for the hero to complete their quest, this metaphorical death has to be overcome. But for the heroes to do so, they have to confront the monster and actually realize that it's none other than themselves. In GFRIEND's storyline, however, for now the sirens are winning, so to know what happens next, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!